Venezuela, a nation that once stood as the crown jewel of South America. It was one of Latin America's most prosperous, self-sufficient, and thriving democracies. Blessed with the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, it boasted a middle class that was the envy of the region, and a standard of living that rivaled parts of Europe. A country rich in resources, prosperity, and promise. But today, Venezuela sits alongside Haiti as one of the poorest and most devastated nations in the Western Hemisphere. Stripped of its legendary wealth, its deeply rooted democracy, and its future. How did a democratic and economic powerhouse descend into a dystopian landscape defined by chronic hunger, hyperinflation, and structural fear? The answer does not lie in a sudden natural disaster. It lies in a calculated political system that systematically ruined a nation, and in the man who inherited the keys to the collapse, Nicolás Maduro Moros. Before he became a dictator with absolute control over millions, Nicolás Maduro was marketed as an everyman. Born in Caracas on November 23, 1962, his roots were deeply embedded in the working class. His father, Nicolás Maduro Garcia, was a prominent leftist union leader, while his mother, Teresa de Jesus Moros, was a homemaker. Maduro's formal education ended abruptly after high school. He worked a series of odd jobs before finding a permanent footing as a bus driver for the Caracas metro system. At first glance, there was nothing extraordinary about him. No elite education, no military background, no family dynasty. But it was behind the wheel of that bus that Nicolás Maduro's political trajectory quietly began. Long pause.
Toward his role in the transit system, Maduro became heavily involved in trade union activism, representing Caracas metro workers. He quickly gravitated toward radical leftist movements, embracing the anti-imperialist and Marxist socialist ideologies that were sweeping through Latin America in the 1980s and 1990s. Then, a charismatic military officer named Hugo Chavez launched what he called the Bolivarian Revolution. And Maduro was there from the very beginning. Chavez saw immense potential in the young unionist. But it wasn't because Maduro was a brilliant political theorist or an overwhelmingly charismatic speaker. In fact, he was neither. Chavez valued Maduro for two specific reasons: absolute obedience and unwavering loyalty. Within Chavez's inner circle, Maduro became the safe paradise. While others vied for the spotlight, Maduro quietly built his influence through back-channel diplomacy, forging vital alliances with the Venezuelan military.
and crucially, with intelligence advisors sent from Cuba. He did not rise through charisma. He rose through loyalty. Long pause.
Before we continue, a quick word from the channel. Creating documentaries like this takes extensive research, writing, and production time. If you're finding value in these deep dives and you'd like to support the continuation of this work, you can do so very simply. Just by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications. It genuinely helps this channel grow and allows more in-depth stories, like this one, to be told. Thank you for your support. Now, let's continue. His loyalty had paid off. In 1998, Maduro was elected to the assembly that rewrote Venezuela's constitution, centralizing executive power. By 2006, Chavez appointed him foreign minister. And in this high-profile role, Maduro became the international bulldog for Chavez's anti-American policies. He forged deep and controversial alliances with Cuba, Russia, China, and Iran, positioning Venezuela as the epicenter of an anti-Western bloc in the Americas. But by October 2012, Hugo Chavez was dying of cancer. And with his final political move, he chose his successor. He handpicked Nicolás Maduro as his vice president and designated him as the heir to the Bolivarian revolution. Then, in March of 2013, Hugo Chavez passed away, and the former bus driver officially stepped into the presidency as interim leader. The torch had been passed, and the stage was set for a tragic new chapter. Long pause.
To the outside world, the Maduro regime insists that Venezuela remains a vibrant democracy because it regularly holds elections. But behind the curtain lies a highly sophisticated, multi-layered apparatus of voter manipulation and psychological intimidation. A blueprint inherited from Chavez and fully weaponized by Maduro. On April 14th, 2013, following Chavez's death, Maduro was declared the winner of the presidential election. To no one's surprise, the fix was already in. So, how does the system work? Let's break down exactly how the Venezuelan National Electoral Council, or the CNE, ensures that the regime never loses. First, the phantom voter registry. The CNE relies on inflated and outdated voter rolls. Dead citizens, duplicate entries, and even millions of migrants who fled the country years ago remain listed as active voters. A centralized system capable of manipulating turnout figures and erasing opposition gains. Second, asymmetrical polling infrastructure. In pro-government regions, registration centers and voting stations are abundant and fully functional. But in opposition strongholds, voting machines.
Third, the Carnet de la Patria and the system of social control. The regime utilizes a digital identification card known as the Carnet de la Patria, a card tied directly to monthly food subsidies and government welfare programs. In many impoverished communities, citizens are required to scan their cards at checkpoints located just outside polling stations. The message is simple.
brutal. Vote for the opposition, and your family may not eat. Fourth, the colectivos and assisted voting. Armed civilian groups, known as colectivos, patrol opposition neighborhoods on motorcycles. Their purpose is intimidation. And under the banner of assisted voting, these loyalist groups frequently oversee the voting process at extremely close range, creating an atmosphere of fear and ensuring that political pressure follows citizens, even into the voting booth. In theory, the ballot was secret. But for millions of Venezuelans, fear was always watching.
This entire apparatus faced its greatest challenge during the heavily disputed presidential elections of May 2018 and most recently, July 2024. In 2024, the Democratic opposition managed to achieve something extraordinary under immense pressure and persecution. They deployed thousands of local observers across polling stations nationwide. Their mission was simple: to physically capture and document the paper backup tallies printed directly by voting machines at each polling station. These receipts told a different story. Independent tallies compiled from these physical records, combined with leaked internal data, pointed to a decisive result: a landslide outcome in favor of the opposition. According to these aggregated sources, Edmundo Gonzalez had secured a clear majority, exceeding 60% of the vote. But in Venezuela, the count has never been only about ballots.
But Maduro utilized the ultimate failsafe: the centralized server trick. Even though individual machines collect votes locally, they transmit the data digitally to CNE-controlled servers in Caracas. This allows the regime to monitor national voting trends in real time. When opposition numbers begin to surge to levels that cannot be controlled, the system activates a mid-count blackout. The servers stop reporting. For hours, the data disappears. Behind closed doors, the numbers are manually adjusted. And when the system resumes, the entire trend has shifted. Following the 2024 vote, the CNE declared Maduro the winner of another 6-year term. Without publishing detailed precinct-level results, without providing verifiable breakdowns, international observation groups, including the European Union, the Organization of American States, and the Carter Center, were either barred from entry or restricted to pre-approved polling sites. The fraud allegations were not subtle. They were systematic. Even Smartmatic, the international voting technology company that once supplied Venezuela's system, publicly stated that over 1 million votes had been fabricated in a previous election. After that revelation, they severed.
But a rigged electoral system is only one half of the equation. To truly understand how Maduro retains total control over the military and state institutions despite economic collapse, you have to follow the money. And that money leads directly into the underworld. International intelligence agencies and federal prosecutors allege that under Maduro's watch, Venezuela has evolved from a standard authoritarian regime into a fully functioning narco-state. At the center of this criminal ecosystem is an organization known as the Cartel de los Soles, the Cartel of the Suns. The name refers to the sun-shaped insignia worn on the uniforms of high-ranking Venezuelan military generals. But despite its name, this is not a traditional cartel. Not structured like those in Colombia. Not centralized. Not easily mapped. Experts describe it instead as a fluid network. Deeply embedded. Highly protected. And operating with state immunity. A system of corruption spanning military officers, judicial figures, and political elites. All functioning under the shield of state power. In other words, it is not a cartel that exists within the state.
The cartel operates an incredibly lucrative, multi-billion-dollar portfolio. But because of Venezuela's opaque institutions, its lack of financial transparency, and the deep secrecy surrounding military ports and airfields, these operations are notoriously difficult to trace. However, investigative reports suggest three primary pillars of this system. First, transnational cocaine transit. Along the lawless border with Colombia, reportedly used as a major trafficking corridor, the network facilitates the movement of hundreds of tons of cocaine. Shipments move through Venezuelan territory before being launched via air routes and fast boats into the Caribbean and Central America, ultimately destined for markets in the United States and Europe. Second, illicit precious metal extraction. In the southern regions of the country, illegal gold mining has expanded significantly. According to investigative reporting, state tolerance of these operations has enabled a shadow economy of extraction. This so-called blood gold is then smuggled across borders, used as a tool for laundering narcotics-derived revenue. Third, fuel and arms smuggling.
Maduro fiercely dismisses these allegations as fabricated United States imperialist propaganda aimed at regime change. But the judicial record tells a different story. In November of 2015, two of Maduro's own nephews, Efrain Antonio Campo Flores and Frankie Francisco Flores de Freitas, were arrested by the DEA during a sting operation in Haiti. They were caught attempting to traffic approximately 800 kilograms of cocaine into the United States. According to court records, they openly referenced their political connections and their access to state-linked airfields. In 2016, both men were convicted in a United States federal court on drug trafficking charges. The fallout was immediate and far-reaching. The U.S. Department of Justice and the Treasury Department subsequently imposed sweeping sanctions on senior political and military figures linked to the Venezuelan state apparatus. Years later, pressure continued to escalate.
by 2025, the United States government announced a reward of up to $50 million for information leading to the arrest or conviction of Nicolás Maduro on federal narco-terrorism-related charges. While geopolitical analysts debate the level of direct operational control Maduro may or may not exercise over individual trafficking networks, the broader structure is not in dispute. Multiple international investigations allege that elements with
While the ruling elite and corrupt military networks accumulate wealth through illicit black markets, the true measure of the Maduro era is written elsewhere, in the daily suffering of the Venezuelan people. The economic collapse has triggered one of the largest displacement crises in modern history. More than 7 million people have fled the country, searching for basic food, medicine, and safety. For those who remain and choose to speak out, the consequences are severe. According to independent findings, including reports from the United Nations Human Rights Office and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, Venezuela has been associated with credible and documented allegations of serious human rights violations. These include extrajudicial killings, forced disappearances, arbitrary detentions, and allegations of torture, targeting individuals perceived as political opponents. Following the July 2024 election, UN investigators and human rights monitors reported an escalation in post-election repression, including killings, disappearances, detentions, and coordinated actions involving security forces and pro-government armed groups known as colectivos. Across multiple reports, a consistent pattern emerges. A system designed not only to control political power, but to suppress dissent through fear and punishment.
According to the Venezuelan human rights organization, Foro Penal, there was an unprecedented spike in state repression following the disputed 2024 election cycle. Over 1,900 individuals were documented as political prisoners, held simultaneously in high-security detention facilities. In parallel, more than 2,000 people were reportedly detained in the aftermath of peaceful protests or for sharing electoral tally sheets online. Many of these detainees were transferred to overcrowded underground facilities, where access to legal representation is severely restricted, and judicial hearings are frequently delayed or denied altogether. Human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, have documented credible reports of ill treatment and torture within these detention centers. These allegations include abuses affecting men, women, and in some reported cases, minors. Prominent political figures who once commanded national attention, such as Leopoldo López, were detained for years under charges widely described as politically motivated. Across international investigations, a consistent legal assessment has emerged. While establishing a direct operational chain of command from individual abuses to the highest office remains complex, within an opaque security state, the pattern of conduct is not in dispute. United Nations bodies and international human rights mechanisms have described the system as one of coordinated political repression, a structure in which state institutions, security forces, and allied groups operate in alignment against a single target: dissent. Long pause. But the crisis inside Venezuela has not remained contained within its borders. It has spilled outward into a wider regional and international security challenge.
In various intelligence assessments and policy discussions, concerns have been raised about the intersection between Venezuela's collapsing institutions and regional migration flows. Among these concerns are reports and allegations that certain individuals released from the prison system may have been among those who later left the country as part of broader migration waves. However, these claims remain highly disputed and are not uniformly supported by verified intelligence findings. What is not in dispute is the scale of displacement. Millions of Venezuelans have left the country under economic collapse, institutional breakdown, and severe humanitarian pressure. This mass migration has created unprecedented challenges for transit countries and border enforcement agencies across the region, including the United States. Screening systems, as well as asylum and border processing mechanisms, have been placed under extreme strain. In this context, security and humanitarian realities have become deeply intertwined. And distinguishing between economic migrants, refugees, and individuals with criminal backgrounds has become increasingly complex.
This deliberate institutional destabilization has created conditions in which violent transnational criminal networks have been able to expand. Among the most prominent of these groups is Tren de Aragua, a highly organized criminal organization that originated inside Venezuela's prison system. Initially confined to a single institution, it evolved from within the Tocaron prison network into a structured transnational enterprise. Experts and investigative reports indicate that its expansion closely followed regional migration routes during Venezuela's economic and humanitarian collapse. Operating across South America, Central America, and into parts of North America, the group has been linked to a range of illicit activities, including human trafficking, extortion, narcotics distribution, and exploitation of vulnerable migrant populations. In multiple jurisdictions, law enforcement agencies describe its structure as decentralized, adaptive, and highly opportunistic. Rather than a single centralized hierarchy, it functions through semi-autonomous cells, embedded within different countries and environments. What began as a domestic breakdown has therefore evolved into a hemisphere.
The history of modern Venezuela stands as one of the most tragic and cautionary tales of the 21st century. This was not a nation that lacked resources. It was a nation that had everything. Self-sufficient, culturally vibrant, and once economically dominant. Yet over time, through a combination of economic mismanagement, institutional decay, corruption, and the concentration of political power, a once prosperous society began to collapse from within. Hugo Chavez laid much of the political foundation of the modern system. And Nicolás Maduro inherited and presided over its most severe crisis phase. Under this trajectory, a small circle of loyalists accumulated wealth and influence, while millions of ordinary Venezuelans were pushed into poverty, mass migration, and long-term humanitarian hardship. But the question Venezuela now faces is no longer only historical.
It is
Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you found this deep dive valuable, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. It truly helps support the channel and allows more stories like this to be told. Until next time.